if you support Indigenous Landback, then you should be supporting the right of return, at the very least, for Palestinian people back to their homes. The very least.
Hello and welcome to Half Smoke. This is our second episode of this podcast, and today we're talking about Palestine and working towards a free Palestine. Today is October 2nd, 2024, and we're here with Nithya Thuru and Ine Begay.
So about a year ago, Israel escalated its genocide against Palestinians, and as we come up on that year, I think it's important to reflect on the escalation, and talk about how we can work towards liberating Palestinians from that apartheid regime.
And at Native Movement, we believe it's important to uplift the narratives that haven't been heard as much, right? And Western media is telling an Israeli narrative pretty continuously and dominating, and it feels really important to talk about why we believe in a free Palestine and how that connects to Indigenous people here on this land, and also why that connects to Landback.
Mm-hmm.
It feels very related to this moment also in Alaska, where Indigenous peoples are still fighting for the right to hunt and fish on their own homelands. And
we are very intentionally choosing to center the Palestinian narrative because for so long we've heard the Israeli side of things. Mm-hmm. And we just want to figure out ways that we can connect and ways that what we have in common as Indigenous people all across the globe.
That's it.
My name is Nithya Thuru. I was raised in Anchorage, Alaska on Dena'ina lands. My family is from Elam, which is a northern province in Sri Lanka, which is a small island under India. And I studied human rights and humanitarian policy at Columbia with a specialization in gender policy as well. And then came back to Alaska, continued to work in the storytelling field with youth, and then eventually left that to work for the ACLU of Alaska, and worked there for about a year. And now I'm sort of between things, but continuing to work for a free Palestine.
Oh, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Welcome. So we're here also with Ine Begay. Can you introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. My name's Ine. Tachitni nishlan to tojini bashishchin do ashin tashanella. So I'm Navajo and Dana Atham. I grew up on the Navajo reservation, and I am the executive director here at Native Movement. I'm married into Netsagwichan people. I guess that's how I come to Alaska. And love brought me to Alaska, and I live here on Lower Tanana lands in this community of Fairbanks with my 3 children, who are Netsagwichan, Ashkenazi Jewish, Dana Atham. We're a mix, and yeah, I have done community organizing, particularly Indigenous community organizing, since the late 90s. Now supporting many things through Native Movement, but also am a member of the Fairbanks for Palestine group.
I'm Sasha. I am from Pilot Point, Alaska, and I'm a Lutic from the Abayo family. I feel like I'm fairly new to organizing and just like activism in general. I have spent my whole life pursuing jobs that allow me to care for others and care for my community. I've been in assisted living homes and working with people with disabilities and the arts and things like that. We have a dish here made for us by Broadband Brittany. It's called Muthwamut Batata, which is a simple Palestinian dish that's made of potatoes, olive oil, parsley, and I think you eat it with the bread. Thank you. Have you ever had this dish before, either of you?
But I love
haven't.
potatoes.
Oh my god, I know, I love potatoes too.
Mm.
And it's potato season.
It is potato season.
Can I have that?
Yes, you
Thank
can
you.
have this one.
Sorry. I thought we were going to pass it around.
It's like really potatoey, but also fresh,
Mm-hmm.
substantial, but still pretty light.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm.
I feel like for me over the last year, I've been trying to learn more just in general about Palestinian culture, because I don't just want to learn about the horrors that are happening right now, but also about how do they celebrate, what's like their joy, like what do they eat, because I feel like when I think about my culture, it's so tied to what I eat that it feels really important to like ground in to a good meal, sharing food together.
Yeah. And we should mention that we did try to get some Palestinian Alaskan voices on this podcast today, but we'll have to do a follow-up maybe later in the year with Palestinian Alaskan voices, because folks were not available today but are a part of our community of organizing, and I know are going through a lot right now emotionally and in all the ways spiritually. So just sending a lot of love to our community who's very directly impacted.
That brings us to our first question, which is, why are you personally invested in a free Palestine?
Yeah, we're about to be at a year of this particular genocide, and it feels really heavy. So as I've learned about this history, it really resonates with me, and it feels like it picks up all the history of our peoples and the genocides and the colonization of what happened to us here on these lands. And I see so many parallels in the policies, in the like colonial actions that have been taken to justify this settler colonialism and this dehumanization of Palestinian people. I see that as our people have been dehumanized.
Let's dive into the history of the genocide in Palestine. I don't know. Do you want to start us off, Nithya?
Yeah. I think from sort of the reading and learning that I've done, one of the starting places of the beginnings of what would lay the groundwork for this genocide was the Balfour Declaration. That was during World War I. As part of the British Mandate, Britain basically promised Palestine as a Jewish homeland. This was sort of as empires were dividing up land. So at the time, Palestine was under the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire, as a loser of World War I, was going to be losing that land to the victors. And so the British Empire basically promised that land. And then in 1948, the State of Israel was formed, and thousands of Palestinians were displaced and dispossessed from their land and were unable and still unable to return to their homeland.
Yeah. And there's a long history even before then, right? Like I feel like we should say that like Jewish people have been historically oppressed in Europe, throughout Europe. And so this history of and then this history of Zionism, which I think we need to talk about Zionism, because people don't, I'm always run into people who don't know what Zionism is not the same thing as Judaism, right? Zionism is not this equal to Jewishness. And so Zionism is this notion of this God-given right to a homeland, right? Which sounds very
like
familiar.
Manifest Destiny.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
There are so many Jewish people who are anti-Zionist,
Mhm.
right? And there are very many non-Jewish people who are Zionists. We see
Right.
that as President Biden
Mhm.
is not Jewish, and he like very outspoken about being a Zionist.
It's really shocking to me how many Christians and how Christianity really aligns with Zionism, because they follow a lot of the same tenets and here when they're establishing
Mhm.
the United States of America.
And-
And my understanding is that Netanyahu is trying to expand the promised land to Lebanon.
I mean, settler colonialism is all about expansion,
Mhm.
right? I mean, we saw that in this country. It was started on the East Coast, and then it was all about West Coast expansion. There's been many videos showing Netanyahu with maps of the Middle East trying to expand Israel, which I would be fighting.
Mhm.
Our ancestors did fight
Mhm.
for homelands,
Yeah.
and I know you come from your homelands,
Mhm.
have a history.
Coming from Sri Lanka, so that country experienced a 25-year-long civil war, and that conflict was centered around the Tamil people who are from Elam and the north and the east wanting to establish a separate state for themselves. From when Sri Lanka became independent in the 40s and up through the 80s, the Tamil people were an ethnic minority and really experienced a lot of discrimination and oppression. And that just sort of continued to build up until 1983. There was a separatist group that basically launched an attack. It killed 13 Sri Lankan soldiers, and that sparked a bunch of riots against the Tamil civilian population. And the government just kind of stood by and let it happen. Hundreds and hundreds of people were displaced. My mom was one of those people who was displaced during that time. Her home was burned down by people who were rioting, and the police just kind of didn't do anything about it. That continued a 25-year-long civil war. And in the case of Sri Lanka, and I think very similar to many other countries that are part of the global majority, is that a big justification for that was that they said they were fighting terrorism. And you see that again and again, right? That people are saying, oh, well, we have to fight the terrorists. And yet they're using that as a justification to target civilian populations and like heavily populated civilian population areas in Sri Lanka. Very similarly to what has been happening in Palestine, the government basically asked people to evacuate to what they called safe zones, and then they bombed those safe zones. And so I remember when that first started happening in Palestine, seeing a lot of people comparing that with Sri Lanka and how they used a very similar tactic to target civilians.
What year was this?
So the war in Sri Lanka started in 1983 and then ended in 2009.
Wow.
I feel like there's so much parallel of what's going on in Palestine, what happened in Sri Lanka, and what's happened in North America here in Alaska and in the lower 48 of they're using the same tactics of dehumanization and this idea of safe zones and just ripping people away from their cultures. I know I've seen settlers in Palestine destroying olive trees.
One thing that Israel has done is made it illegal for Palestinians to forage for native plants there, and that has, impacted their ability to be able to live their traditional lives.
Yeah.
Which is really similar to things that are happening here.
Yeah. So one thing that confuses me that I've heard a lot is people kind of counter-arguing the fact that Palestinians are indigenous and are trying to argue that Israel is indigenous. And that's just an argument that I don't understand. Is there, I don't know, maybe we don't have to get into it, but it's what do you say to people when they say that?
It's a hard,
I have close
conversation.
friends. I have a very dear friend of mine who I think kept me from really speaking out for years because she's Israeli, and she would tell me, oh, you don't know, it's complicated. You don't know enough. Jewish people have been there for 2,000, our people were there 2,000 years ago. I think what we're looking at is Ashkenazi Jewish or European Jewish folks who have lived generations in Europe using that as an excuse to like impose settler colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
And even if folks had their great-great-grandparents that, felt like that was where they're from, what is happening is a systemic issue, right? The creation of a nation state on a place where Palestinian people's generations and generations and generations are buried
Mm-hmm.
in that land. I think about the fact that as Diné people, we have stories about traveling this continent. My partner's people and my people, we have a same language family. And so we know that our people were once here or there. Like
Mm-hmm.
we traveled this continent. And it doesn't give me a right to come to Alaska and be like, yo, Sasha, this is my house now,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or now I'm going to impose the Navajo Nation on Lower Tanana territories. No,
Mm-hmm.
this is, as Indigenous peoples, where we respect the people who have been tending these lands for the past 1,000 years or so, right?
Mm-hmm.
What time immemorial. And we can live together in peace without building colonial systems of oppression.
Mm-hmm. So how has, it's almost coming up on a year since October 7th, and not that that's when the conflict began, but for a lot of people, that's when like awareness first started. So how has your perspective of the genocide in Palestine changed over time, and how does that impact the way you engage with this issue in a tangible way?
For me, my family talked about Palestine in our household from when I was very young. So it was an issue that I was always aware of. And I think because my family had an experience in some ways that was similar, it was something that I think my family felt like they could relate to. And so the Palestinian perspective was something that was always there for me. I think in the last year, that's really heightened a lot. And I think what makes me hopeful in a lot of ways is seeing other people sort of wake up to what has been happening there. And I think that has also woken people up to what has been happening here in the United States, on Indigenous lands here, and in places all over the world, right? You see people talking about Congo and Sudan and so many places in the world that have been subject to colonization and the harms that come with that. So it's been exciting to be in community with people as we all start to sort of like really wake up to that and put action behind that as well. For me, I can't imagine how people aren't taking action.
Mm-hmm.
Watching from the very beginning of kids being pulled out of rubble, people screaming over the bodies of their family members, and continuing to see that happen every single day. I just can't imagine how people aren't taking action.
Yeah. So what ways have you, what does your action look like? Because I know did you help to found or help to, you're a part of.
I wouldn't say it that way. That makes it sound fancy.
It is kind of fancy because
Yeah.
it feels like, honestly, it feels like a relief that there are groups of people who want to come together around this.
Mhm.
So it's like this oasis. But you're a part of Anchorage for Palestine, and
Mhm.
what has that been like for you?
There is a Palestinian person in Anchorage who kind of formed a group last year, at the end of last year. And at the time, there were a lot of different people in cities across the country who were trying to get their city councils and assemblies to pass a ceasefire resolution.
Mm-hmm.
And the hope behind that was that if the cities passed those ceasefire resolutions, it could pressure people higher up to also take action that could lead to a ceasefire. So that was really sort of the first big action that Anchorage for Palestine organized around.
I remember going to
Yeah.
those assembly meetings and going
Mhm.
around the organizing of that, feeling feeling so hopeful about what it could mean.
Yeah, a different time, perhaps. But yeah, we were hopeful about that, and we really don't describe ourselves as a super formal organization. Where we have described ourselves as a group of folks in Anchorage who are concerned about what's happening and want to see an end to the genocide. And so, yeah, we initially organized around trying to get the Anchorage Assembly to pass a ceasefire resolution, worked on that with Assembly members for several weeks, attended a lot of Assembly meetings where we were holding signs and attempting to testify, and
just really being shut down, though.
Being shut down constantly. And then that sort of culminated in them presenting a resolution. And the resolution that they presented was completely different from what we as organizers had worked on with the Assembly members. At the last minute, they presented what they called an S version of the resolution, and that resolution took out any mention of Palestinians and the death toll of how many Palestinians have been killed, murdered, and the resolution added language that affirmed Israel's quote-unquote right to defend itself, basically just turning the whole resolution into Zionist propaganda.
Yeah.
And we just didn't feel like we could support it. And this was very last minute. We were at the meeting when we found out that this new version was being presented. So we very quickly pivoted. We changed our signs, and we basically all held signs that said, like, vote no on the S version.
No S version.
No
I remember
version.
the Sharpie being passed around.
Yeah, we were
in all
passing the
rows.
Sharpie around because it was so last minute. And it was such a betrayal, honestly, because we had worked so hard and so closely with with Assembly members to try to get something that we could all support. And for us, we felt like it was so basic. We were just asking for a resolution that acknowledged how many Palestinians had been murdered and to ask for an end to the violence. And they couldn't even do that. And it was really, really, really disappointing. And I think we came out of that experience feeling disheartened and let down by our elected officials and wanting to really pivot away from that.
Yeah.
And I think also sort of in the background of this happening, sort of at the beginnings of this in the fall and winter, a lot of people in the community had been trying to do a lot of work to talk to our representatives in the Senate and the House to try to get them also to vote for some kind of ceasefire. And people were calling those offices every single day, and those representatives were not listening to people.
Truly.
And so I think those two things layered together sort of disillusioned us in a way in terms of our engagement with elected officials and made us feel like there had to be another way forward because they just weren't listening to us.
Like asking a colonial structure to understand decolonized ideals.
Exactly.
Yeah. Has anything like that happened in Fairbanks that you're aware of?
Yeah, well, and for maybe to answer your first question too, of how things have changed over the year for me, I think I was very quiet on this issue for a while, and because I had friends who turned out to have very Zionist perspectives, and that was really surprising to me. People who have been in the movement with, who it's sort of this Israeli exception to everything, right?
I remember when Native Movement released the statement about how we support Palestine, and like just reading the comments under that and being so shocked at like members of our community essentially
who are down
just
with
supporting
us in our movements for justice, who are down with us in our movements for Landback, and not connecting that what is happening in Israel, what is happening in Palestine is the same. Like, if you support Indigenous Landback, then you should be supporting the right of return, at the very least, for Palestinian people back to their homes. the very least. So it was very surprising. It was very revealing. It's been very revealing over the last year. And I've had some really hard conversations with friends who, they're Jewish friends who are on the fence because they have family who's telling them one thing and then they're feeling something different. And so it felt like we have to get off the fence. We can't be quiet about it. We can't be neutral about it because there is no neutrality in a genocide.
And it's not actually, like, people will say, or like play devil's advocate and say, like, it's just really complicated to know, like, with everything going on, who to root for, basically. It's like the kind of perspective I've received. And it's just like, it's not actually. There's like thousands of children are dying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get emails from some close friends who are smart people, lawyers, who are like, maybe there's both sides. Like maybe there's two sides to this. Like, you don't have to be solely, if you can be for Palestinian people and you can be, for apparently genocide, which I was like, no, actually, I can't.
No.
Me, I cannot.
There is no two-state solution.
There is a two-state solution is lip service to continue to maintain an apartheid state. And one of the first books I read was Beyond a Two-State Solution, which is a really great short read. It's free online.
That's cool.
And it's from a Palestinian author who outlines what a beautiful single-state solution could look like. A two-state solution continuously gets touted by politicians as a solution for this Middle East crisis, right? Quote unquote. And that is this idea that there will be an Israeli state and there will be a Palestinian state.
All on the Palestinian land.
On Palestinian land, right. And so the two-state solution keeps being touted as these two will have their own rights. But what is actually happening is that Israel is an occupying government, an occupying force on the entirety of Palestine. And so even though the West Bank is, supposedly technically Palestinian land, and Israel left Gaza in 2005, they still control everything that happens within Palestine. So they are the occupying nation, controlling life for Palestinian people.
I remember at the beginning of this that Israel was trying to deny that it was bombing hospitals. And now there's no hospitals left, they're not even trying to hide the fact that they have bombed hospitals, schools, refugee camps.
It's insane that I'm still struggling with our elected leadership, Mary Peltola, Murkowski, smart women. I know they're smart, and they're rubber stamping a genocide.
Yeah.
And according to our own U.S. laws, we also are breaking the law as a U.S. government nation. We're breaking our own laws. Leahy law was established. I don't know when, but essentially says that the U.S. government will not give aid to any country that is committing human rights violations. And the international courts have found that Israel, right, is committing human rights violations, amongst many other entities have found this and documented it. And we continue to give billions of dollars. And that, I think, was also the place that got me like we need to yell about this. We're closing schools in Fairbanks.
We have climate crisis and climate emergencies happen, climate refugees.
Right.
Yeah.
We can't afford to relocate communities that are going into the ocean or being flooded because of climate change. But we're going to send billions of dollars to Israel. This is where I don't understand why more of us aren't in the streets nonstop, and how our elected leadership can even hold their heads up with this.
we've just been talking about how all of the conflict, Palestine being so far away, and like a lot of people are feeling like it's so far away it doesn't even affect me, or it doesn't have anything to do with me. Like, why is it actually related to what we do? And
Yeah, I can start and say that one thing I think about a lot is that a lot of our tax dollars and our money is being sent to Israel and funding this genocide. There is a movement called BDS, which is Boycott, Divestments, and Sanctions, that's been pushing for an end to Israeli apartheid, specifically through asking people to divest from that. And to also boycott companies that are associated with Israel and are directly funding what's happening. One thing that Anchorage for Palestine has been trying to do is to draw attention to some of those companies, and we're hoping to sort of pivot towards that. I talked earlier about how we've been super disillusioned by our elected officials, and I think one way that we can have a direct impact outside of that electoral system is to look at like where our money is going and to try to change that.
I struggled paying taxes this year. So I was like, man, I really don't want to do this. It's going to whatever this government wants to do with it. It's not going to our schools because they're closing 3 schools here in Fairbanks. It feels like we have a mandate, a responsibility to hold our elected leaders accountable for that. And then, our money through various products that we're buying, our money in the banks. How's the PFD, the Permanent Fund Dividend, invested in this genocide? How is the university and their endowments invested in this genocide? These are all questions that we need more folks to be asking.
Yeah, and I have been hearing about how nationwide all of the universities have been preparing to stop students from exercising their right to free speech by protesting what's happening.
So many things have come forward in this year, both like we're seeing the suppression of freedom of speech, like we've never seen it. I mean, we're really inching towards some real fascist policies where in numerous states they tried to ban protesting, including this state, right? They tried to
Governor Dunleavy's bill,
That didn't pass, thankfully, this year. And that took people organizing to stop that. I think that means they're scared.
Yeah, because they know that we have power. They know that students have power. And I've come across many students who have had questions about, like, can I protest? Can I do an encampment and things like that? And it's just like, you can. There are things that you can
appreciate that you said that they're scared, because I think I've heard someone else describe it as sort of the last dying gasps of empire. You know, they know that empire is falling at this point, right? Like, people are really fed up with it, and they are scared of our power.
Yeah. Nithya, I know you've experienced suppression and oppression firsthand over your opinion on Palestine. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. I was working at the ACLU of Alaska for about a year, and I was working as their queer and trans justice program manager when the genocide started to escalate in October of last year. And at the time, our staff just wasn't talking about it at all. And I also just wasn't talking about it. And then sometime, I think in November, we received an email that went out to our whole staff in Alaska, basically saying that we weren't going to be talking about Palestine, that this was an issue that was not related to our work. And I sent an email back to the entire staff and just expressed my disappointment that we, as an organization that prides itself on being, you know, a champion of social justice in the community and fighting for people's rights, that we hadn't talked about it and hadn't called it for what it was, which is genocide. And following me sending that email, I got pulled into the director's office and was basically intimidated into silence. I was told that essentially that I needed to stop talking about the issue, that this wasn't related to our work, and sort of cast over that conversation was this implication that if I continued to talk about it, that there would be consequences. But me being who I am, I just couldn't stop talking about it. And so I kept, bringing it up in different ways. I think that winter there was a global strike that took place, and I took the day off and let people know why I was striking on that day or taking the day off and not working. And what resulted from me continuing to speak up was that I started to experience pretty direct retaliation. It was something that my direct supervisor recognized was happening. He also recognized that it felt like it was pretty racist, like my white colleagues were not being targeted in the same way. And that just really continued to escalate up into the spring. And then in February, I was told explicitly that I could no longer talk about Palestine in the workplace at all. And that was a conversation that happened with HR and all this stuff, right? And so interesting to think, I've done a lot of reading about workplaces and how they sort of replicate carceral systems and how HR is often, the cops of an organization, right? And aren't really there to protect employees. And I felt really alone. Most of the staff at the ACLU was white. So as a predominantly white institution, I think they were more interested in perpetuating those colonial structures rather than questioning them and trying to support having a productive conversation. And I think what was tough about that experience is that, I wasn't even asking the organization to take a particular stance.
Mm-hmm.
I was just asking that we could talk about it. And there was so much resistance to that, to the point that after I started talking about Palestine, every time I talked about decolonization or anti-racism, I would get this huge retaliation and pushback even on those things. And continuing to experience that essentially pushed me to leave the organization, which is sad because I think one thing that I really tried to emphasize before I left was that I think all of the issues that we are working on as organizers are interconnected. And especially for me as a queer person, and I was managing their queer and trans justice project, I feel like queer liberation is inherently tied to Palestinian liberation, and that queer people cannot be free until Palestine is free. And it was really important for me to weave that into how I did the work that I was doing. And unfortunately, I just couldn't do that at the ACLU.
Yeah, I feel like Palestine has really opened up my eyes to the oppression that we're all facing too. Because if we don't have freedom of speech about one thing, then we don't actually have freedom of speech. And I feel like people don't really realize that because a lot of times they're not pushing those boundaries. They're kind of staying where it's comfortable so they don't discover firsthand that we don't actually have freedom of speech.
Yeah. And I think that's another reason why it should matter to us as Alaskans. What's happening across the ocean has happened here and can happen again in various forms. We see this suppression of people being able to just talk about it in their organizations, in their workplace, or these policies that are suppressing the right to protest. And I think the other thing is we're seeing this heavily militarized police forces across the country.
There's I don't know if you know, but there is a proposal for a cop city facility here in Fairbanks, and it's still just in the planning and prep stages, but it's really, really scary that that's the first step towards them. Well, I mean, we already get, the cops get their tactics from IDF and the military already as it is. Yeah.
The Atlanta cop city that's got a lot of focus on it right now was training Israeli IDF, IOF soldiers, and also vice versa, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
they're setting up the same militarized police forces across the country, including in Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another reason why we should care. I mean, we live in a very militarized state. We have a lot of, Air Force and Marines and these things, and so that's also another reason. Like, we are in our backyards, potentially supplying
Mm-hmm.
the Israeli government as well. We have in these many ways blood on our own hands,
Yeah.
and so we have to get involved. It's going to come back on us.
The same militarized cops who have learned tactics from Israel have killed 8 Alaskans since May, and they just declared that they were all justified, and that's just horrifying to me. It's like the cops get to kill whoever they want, and then they get away with it, and that's really scary. That's like feels like a really direct connection of like why we should be caring about people across the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess like one like thing that brought me hope, it was actually the anniversary of the Nakba. There was a are we allowed to talk about that? There was a lot of like secrecy. The rolling blockade.
It was a fully legal. That was a fully legal action.
Technically, it was legal. It wasn't officially associated with Anchorage for Palestine. So,
Okay.
but you can
It's
say
just-
that it happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so
Sorry.
the Nakba is a Palestinian or Arabic word for like catastrophe,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what that time when thousands of Palestinians were moved off of their homelands. That's what that is referred to as a Nakba from Palestinian people.
Yeah.
A catastrophe.
So it was the anniversary, and people wanted to come together and just commemorate that and just like speak out. And so there was this rolling blockade where in Anchorage, there's this pedestrian light you can press, and then we kind of just like legally used the pedestrian crosswalk many times, and people were getting angry, and we took the opportunity to like pass out flyers to people in the cars. And it was really interesting to see the different reactions that we got from, because there's so many people in support of us, so many people it felt like were kind of grateful to see something happening. Then there was of course people who were just angry of like, I actually have a place to be and you guys are ruining that for me.
People have to spend a little bit of time thinking about like, why is this happening? I
Mhm.
think that's an important action.
Yeah, something that gave me a lot of hope this summer is a group of us basically registered for the Pride Parade in Anchorage as Queers for Palestine and got to march in the parade. And to be honest, when we were planning to do that action, we sort of thought that we wouldn't be accepted into the parade. We thought that they wouldn't want someone talking about Palestine and like openly marching in support of Palestine in the parade. And we were really pleasantly surprised. Like we received like a really warm welcome from the people organizing. The person who was assigned to us, they were like our parade marshal. She came up to me and she said, I asked specifically to be assigned to your group because I was so excited that you're in the parade. And it was, we felt very seen, right? Like we're marching and there's like hundreds of people along the streets watching us as we're chanting in support of Palestine, as we're holding signs. And it was really cool to see. So I think that gave me a lot of hope that there are people in the community who understand that what's happening is wrong and that we need to be speaking out about it.
Yeah. Oh, we're in a time of immense transition, and the climate change is just going to make all of the wars and migration, climate refugees, even more intense. And so to me, the hopeful thing is to know our neighbors, to know our community, to know how we can set up mutual aid, how we can organize actions together. And so there's a Fairbanks for Palestine, there's a Juneau for Palestine, the Anchorage for Palestine. There's also an Anchorage Palestinian.
Oh yeah, the Palestinian Solidarity Initiative. Yeah.
So numerous ways that Alaskans can get involved.
Mm-hmm.
This country is the beast that is perpetuating. Like, if this country wasn't sending billions of dollars to fund this, it wouldn't be happening. And many pundits and many analysts have said this.
Mm-hmm.
So we are in the belly of the beast. We have a responsibility, and it hasn't been that long. My dad was in boarding school. You know, he was in these places where he spoke his language as our first language, and was beaten and abused when he spoke his language. Those actions of settler colonialism are only one generation removed, right? And so this notion that things continue as they are because they have been is also a colonial notion. Like, no, we can change this. Everything is changing, and justice and equity will only be secured through our actions.
And like, I'm a person, like, comfort and like coziness is really important to me. So I had to go through this like thing of like, I need to stop prioritizing myself and my comfort and figure out what I can be doing, ways that I can be making myself uncomfortable, and like just like broadening my perspective so that I can be more literate and more aware and more involved.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when this first started escalating in the fall, I talked to a lot of people who tended to be white people prioritizing their comfort, who were basically like saying that they weren't watching what was happening on social media because they needed to protect their mental health, which that's understandable to an extent, right? Like, we all don't need to be doom scrolling on social media all the time.
Mm-hmm.
However, there were and are people in Palestine who are risking their lives to show us what's happening directly.
Right.
And they were the only people who were doing that. There was nowhere else where we could see that.
Mm-hmm.
And to shut yourself off to that is to prioritize your own comfort over what is actually happening out there and what we need to be bearing witness to. We owe them at least that, to bear witness to what's happening.
Yeah.
Like I said, our ancestors had to like go through so much, and we still found moments to laugh and celebrate and be joyous. So like, I don't have to check out per se. I can actually, being in community gives me that sustainability.
Yeah. Actually finding a community of people who want to talk about the feelings that we're having about Palestine and want to talk about things that are happening there. It felt like I'm sharing the burden, and that made it so much easier to be able to maintain that hope. And I also think like sometimes I have a hard time feeling the hope, right? But I'm just like, you still keep going. Like, you don't stop because the feeling of hope stops. That's like how I feel about it. Like, it's yeah. But I do think that we're coming to the end of our conversation, so I just want to give you both an opportunity to give some final thoughts, maybe some wisdom to people who are wanting to stay connected, build connection, engage and re-engage in Palestine.
Yeah, I'm like, wisdom. What's that? Never
or
heard
I guess
of her.
maybe what's something that you would like to hear? What's something that you want to impart?
I would like to impart that I think there's a lot of hope, and going back to what we were just talking about around community and building community, something that I've been in conversation with a lot of folks about is wanting to practice the world that we want to see and to like engage with each other in the ways that sort of emulate the world that we want to build together. And so I think a lot of that means being in joyous community with each other, laughing, being really silly and gay, like really practicing what we want to see and imagining a world beyond colonization, a world beyond settler violence, right? And what could that look like? I think as we like continue to practice that together, it's important because as empire falls away, you know, what comes up in its place. And I think it's really important to be in community with each other and enjoy that, so that we have like a sort of roadmap for what that can look like as we move into the future together, which is hopefully a really beautiful future.
I love that. Bringing our queer and digibaddie selves into the future. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful, I mean, I think that's some beautiful wisdom right there. It's community being, I think when we're visible, and sometimes that's scary to be visible. Sometimes it's scary to walk into the grocery store with my keffiyeh or my like ceasefire pin. I don't know who this line of, you know, white dudes is. I don't know what their beliefs are. Sometimes it's scary to show up as our full selves. But I think that more often than not, I feel like we're making it safer for each other when we show up in that way, right? And often then I see more and more people wearing those indicators of our values, and I think that's what we're striving for, right? Is to normalize these values of justice and liberation and being our full selves.
And taking up space, like taking up as much space as the white people and the colonizers and like everyone is who already is comfortable taking up space. We want to like elbow them out of the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need space to be glorious,
right?
And that's gonna be beautiful for everyone, right? I think everyone has a place, and for so long, many of us didn't feel like we had a place or couldn't take up space, and so, you know, being our glorious, glittery selves is gonna make it. It's not a scarcity model. It's gonna make it more beautiful for everyone else.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for being here today. I learned so much and had so much fun talking to you both. For the audience that's listening or watching, we're hoping to put together a list of resources, of some of the resources that we've talked about today, so that you can access them yourselves. If you have any thoughts about what you want to hear us talk about, please tell us, because we're here as a reflection of our community. I know we didn't cover it all. We couldn't cover it all. But I feel like this is a good start.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, happy to be here.